The moment I walked into Romano's Italian villa that October evening, I should have known it would be the last time I'd ever set foot in that restaurant as Marcus Thompson's wife. The hostess smiled warmly and led us to the private dining room where the Thompson family was already gathered, their voices carrying that particular blend of sophistication and judgment that had become all too familiar over the past 4 years. What I didn't realize was that by the end of that night, I'd be banned not just from their precious family restaurant, but from their Thanksgiving table, their Christmas morning, and eventually from their son's life entirely. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how a girl from Austin, Texas, who thought she'd found her fairy tale ending, discovered that sometimes the people who should love you the most are the ones capable of the deepest cruelty. My name is Emma Martinez, and I've always been the type of person who believes in the good in people, sometimes to my own detriment. Growing up in a warm, chaotic household in Austin with my Mexican-American father who owned a small auto repair shop and my Irish mother who taught elementary school, I learned that love meant showing up, speaking up, and never letting the people you care about face their battles alone. My parents fought like hell when they disagreed, but they loved just as fiercely, and our dinner table was always open to anyone who needed a meal and a listening ear. When I moved to Illinois for graduate school at the University of Illinois at Chicago, I was excited about the adventure but homesick for that warmth. The Midwest felt colder in ways that went beyond the weather, more reserved, more careful with emotions. I threw myself into my marketing studies, determined to build something meaningful, to prove that the scholarship kid from Texas belonged in those gleaming Chicago boardrooms I dreamed of conquering. It was during my second year, at a coffee shop near campus, that I first met Marcus Thompson. I was buried in textbooks, probably looking frazzled with my dark hair, escaping from what had started as a neat ponytail, when someone cleared their throat above me. I looked up to find this tall, blonde man in an expensive coat, holding 2 cups of coffee, and wearing the kind of confident smile that suggested he was used to getting what he wanted. "You look like you could use some caffeine," he said, setting one of the cups down near my stack of papers. "I'm Marcus." There was something magnetic about him from that first moment. Maybe it was the way he seemed so sure of himself, so different from the guys I'd dated back home who were still figuring out their majors, let alone their futures. Marcus was in his final year of law school, already had a position lined up at a prestigious Chicago firm, and when he talked about his plans, you could see the roadmap of success laid out clearly in his mind. Our courtship felt like something out of a movie. He'd pick me up in his sleek black BMW and take me to restaurants I'd only read about in magazines, places where the waitstaff knew the vintage of every wine and the chef's specialties by heart. He introduced me to theater, to art galleries, to a world of culture and sophistication that felt both thrilling and slightly intimidating. When he brought me flowers, they weren't gas station bouquets but elegant arrangements that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. The first time he mentioned his family, it was with the kind of casual pride that spoke to a lifetime of privilege. The Thompsons owned a successful medical equipment company that had been in the family for 3 generations. They lived in Wheaton, in one of those stately colonial homes that appeared in magazines about Chicago's most prestigious suburbs. They were members of the country club, had season tickets to the symphony, and maintained the kind of social connections that opened doors before you even knocked. "They're going to love you," Marcus assured me as we drove out to meet them for the first time. It was a crisp fall afternoon, and I'd spent an hour choosing my outfit, settling on a navy dress that I hoped struck the right balance between respectful and stylish. "Mom's been asking about you constantly since I told her I was seeing someone special." The Thompson house was exactly what I'd imagined, all brick and ivy and manicured landscaping. Carol Thompson answered the door wearing pearls and the kind of smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She was elegant in that understated way that spoke to old money, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her handshake firm but brief. "Emma, how lovely to finally meet you," she said, though her gaze seemed to catalog everything from my shoes to my handbag in a matter of seconds. "Marcus has told us so much about you. Please come in." Robert Thompson was in the den, reading the Wall Street Journal with the kind of concentration most people reserved for medical diagnoses. He stood when we entered, tall and distinguished with gray hair and the same blue eyes as his son, extending a hand that felt like a business transaction. "So you're the young lady who's been keeping our Marcus so busy," he said with a chuckle that felt rehearsed. We were beginning to think he'd forgotten where he came from. Dinner was served in a dining room that looked like it belonged in a museum, complete with china that Carol mentioned had been in the family for 4 generations, and crystal that caught the light from an elaborate chandelier. The conversation flowed around topics I could contribute to but not quite lead, discussions of people they knew, places they'd traveled, investments and social obligations that formed the fabric of their world. I held my own, drawing on everything my parents had taught me about being gracious and interested in others, asking questions about their business and their travels. But I could feel something underneath the polite conversation, a sense that I was being evaluated against some invisible standard that no one had bothered to explain. It was when Carol mentioned Ashley that I first felt the shift in temperature. "You simply must meet Ashley," Carol said, her face lighting up in a way it hadn't when talking about anything else that evening. "She's married to Marcus's younger brother Kevin, and she's just wonderful. The most thoughtful girl, always thinking of others. She grew up here in Wheaton, actually, just a few blocks away. Her family's been part of our social circle for years." Marcus reached under the table and squeezed my hand, a gesture that should have been reassuring but somehow felt more like an apology. "Ashley's great," he said, though his tone was carefully neutral. "You'll meet her soon enough." But it was Robert who really drove the point home. "She fits right in," he said, with a meaningful look at Carol. "Understands the way things are done around here. Beautiful girl, and those children of hers are just delightful. She's been such a blessing to this family." I smiled and nodded, and made appropriate noises, but something cold settled in my stomach. The way they talked about Ashley, this perfect daughter-in-law I hadn't even met yet, felt like a comparison I was already losing. The evening continued pleasantly enough on the surface, but I left feeling like I'd failed a test I didn't know I was taking. In the car on the way back to my apartment, Marcus was unusually quiet. "They liked you," he said finally, but it sounded more like he was trying to convince himself than reassure me. "Did they?" I asked, keeping my voice light. "Because it felt like they spent the whole evening talking about how perfect Ashley is." Marcus sighed, running a hand through his hair. She's been part of the family for 5 years now. Mom and Dad are very fond of her. But that doesn't mean anything about how they feel about you." But I knew better. I'd grown up watching my parents read between the lines of social situations, understanding the politics of small business in a town where reputation mattered. I recognized the signs of being measured against someone else and coming up short. I met Ashley 3 weeks later at Marcus's birthday dinner, and she was everything the Thompsons had said and more. Petite and blonde with the kind of effortless style that suggested personal shoppers and expensive salons. She walked into Romano's Italian villa like she owned the place. Which, in a way, she did. The staff greeted her by name, the manager personally ensured our table was perfect, and even the sommelier came over to discuss wine pairings for our meal. "Emma!" she exclaimed when Marcus introduced us, pulling me into an enthusiastic hug that felt genuine enough to make me question my own paranoia. "I've been dying to meet you. Marcus hasn't stopped talking about how brilliant you are." She was charming and engaging, asking thoughtful questions about my studies and my plans after graduation. She remembered details Marcus had told her about my family and expressed genuine interest in visiting Austin someday. When her children, 6-year-old Lily and 4-year-old Noah, joined us for dessert, she managed them with the kind of patient grace that made parenting look effortless. But I noticed other things too. The way Carol's entire demeanor changed when Ashley arrived, becoming warmer and more animated than I'd ever seen her. The way Robert immediately started asking Ashley about her opinions on everything from the restaurant's new menu to local politics. The way the conversation naturally centered around her and her family, as if the rest of us were supporting players in her show. Ashley organized the most wonderful charity fundraiser for the Children's Hospital last month. Carol gushed over our tiramisu. Raised over $50,000 in one evening. She has such a gift for bringing people together. "It was really a team effort," Ashley said, with the kind of modest smile that somehow made her seem even more perfect. I couldn't have done it without all the amazing volunteers, and Kevin was such a support, handling all the logistics while I focused on the program. Kevin, Marcus's younger brother, beamed at his wife with obvious adoration. Where Marcus was serious and driven, Kevin was easygoing and charming, the kind of person who made everyone around him feel comfortable. It was clear that he worshipped Ashley, and equally clear that his parents approved wholeheartedly of his choice. "We're so lucky to have Ashley in the family," Robert said, raising his wine glass in a small toast. "She's made Kevin so happy, and those grandchildren of ours are just the light of our lives." I caught Marcus's eye across the table and saw something I didn't like. Not jealousy exactly, but a kind of resigned acceptance that this was how things were in his family. Ashley was the golden daughter-in-law, the standard by which all others would be measured, and there was nothing anyone could do to change that dynamic. As the months passed and Marcus and I grew more serious, I found myself constantly in Ashley's shadow. Every family gathering felt like a performance where I was always one step behind, 1 degree less polished, one connection short of truly belonging. When we announced our engagement at Christmas dinner, the response was enthusiasm that felt just slightly forced. "Congratulations," that came with subtle suggestions about wedding planners Ashley recommended and venues where the family had connections. "Ashley planned the most beautiful wedding," Carol said as we looked through photo albums later that evening. "Everything was just perfect. She has such exquisite taste." The photos were indeed stunning. Ashley looked radiant in a designer gown that probably cost more than my first car, surrounded by hundreds of guests in a venue that looked like something from a fairy tale. The reception was at Romano's Italian villa, naturally, with custom menus and flowers that must have required a small army of florists. "We'd love to help with your planning," Carol continued, though her tone suggested that help came with very specific expectations. "I'm sure Ashley would be happy to introduce you to her vendors. She knows all." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The best people. Planning our wedding became an exercise in diplomatic navigation. Every suggestion I made was met with gentle redirections toward Ashley's preferences, Ashley's vendors, Ashley's vision of what a Thompson family wedding should look like. When I wanted a mariachi band to honor my heritage, Carol worried it might be too ethnic for their guests. When I suggested a more casual venue that reflected Marcus's and my style, Robert questioned whether it would photograph well for the society pages. Marcus tried to be supportive, but I could see him struggling between his desire to make me happy and his ingrained need to keep family peace. He'd grown up in a world where certain expectations were simply understood, where maintaining appearances and family harmony mattered more than individual preferences. "We could compromise," he'd say after particularly tense planning sessions. "Maybe we could have the mariachi band for the cocktail hour and something more traditional for dinner." But compromise felt like erosion, each small concession taking me further away from the celebration I'd dreamed of and closer to becoming someone I didn't recognize. By the time we walked down the aisle at a venue Ashley had recommended, wearing a dress from a salon Ashley had suggested, with flowers arranged by Ashley's florist, I felt like I was starring in someone else's wedding. The reception was at Romano's Italian villa, because of course it was. Chef Isabella Romano personally oversaw our menu, the same way she had for Ashley and Kevin's wedding, and the staff treated us with the kind of attention that suggested the Thompson name carried significant weight. It should have been perfect, and in many ways it was. But standing there in my beautiful borrowed life, surrounded by people who were trying very hard to accept me, I felt more alone than I had since moving to Illinois. The first year of marriage was a careful dance of trying to find my place in Marcus's world while maintaining some sense of who I was. I threw myself into my career, landing a position at a prestigious marketing firm in downtown Chicago, proving that the girl from Austin could hold her own in the big leagues. I made friends with my colleagues, found a great yoga studio, and slowly built a life that felt authentically mine, at least during the hours when I wasn't navigating Thompson family expectations. But the holidays were always difficult. Every gathering felt like a test I was still failing, despite my best efforts to contribute, to fit in, to prove that I belonged. Ashley continued to be the perfect daughter-in-law, organizing family photos and coordinating gift exchanges, and somehow always knowing exactly what to say to make Carol laugh, or how to engage Robert in conversations about business or politics. Thanksgiving was particularly challenging because it represented everything the Thompson family valued: tradition, elegance, and the kind of seamless entertaining that required both significant resources and generational knowledge. The feast was always held at the family home, with Carol orchestrating a meal that could have graced the pages of a lifestyle magazine. But the preparation began weeks earlier, with shopping trips to specialty stores Ashley knew about, and conversations about family recipes that had been passed down through generations I wasn't part of. I tried to contribute, offering to bring dishes from my family's tradition or to help with the cooking, but my suggestions were met with polite resistance. Carol had her system, Ashley understood the timing, and adding new elements might disrupt the careful choreography they'd perfected over years of practice. "That's so sweet of you to offer," Carol would say with a smile that managed to be both grateful and dismissive. "But Ashley and I have everything under control. Why don't you just relax and enjoy yourself?" So I became a guest at celebrations that should have felt like family gatherings, watching from the sidelines as Ashley effortlessly managed multiple conversations while keeping an eye on her children, and somehow still looking perfectly put together. She knew which serving pieces went with which dishes, where extra chairs were stored, and how to coordinate the timing so that everything appeared on the table simultaneously and at the perfect temperature. The second Thanksgiving was when I first tried to assert myself more actively. I'd spent weeks researching traditional Thompson family recipes, practicing techniques, and planning contributions that would complement rather than compete with the established menu. I wanted to prove that I could be part of the tradition, that I understood and respected what mattered to this family I'd married into. "I thought I'd make my grandmother's stuffing this year," I announced during the planning call Carol organized every October. "It's a family recipe that's been passed down for generations, and I think it would be a lovely addition to the meal." The silence on the other end of the phone lasted long enough to make me wonder if the call had dropped. "That's very thoughtful," Carol said carefully. "But we already have our stuffing recipe planned. It's been part of our Thanksgiving for 23 years. Ashley's actually making it this year, since she's mastered the technique." "I could make both," I suggested, though I was already feeling the familiar weight of rejection settling in my chest. "Variety is always nice." "Oh, honey," Carol's laugh had an edge to it that made my skin prickle. "Two stuffings would just confuse people. And frankly, Ashley's version is absolutely perfect. I'm sure your grandmother's recipe is lovely for your family's gatherings, but we like to maintain our traditions here." I hung up that day feeling like I'd been slapped. It wasn't just about the stuffing, of course. It was about the message underneath her words. That my family's traditions weren't sophisticated enough for the Thompson table. That my contributions weren't welcome in their carefully curated world. That no matter how hard I tried, I would always be an outsider looking in. Marcus found me crying in our kitchen that evening, and when I tried to explain what had happened, his response was the kind of well-meaning dismissal that somehow hurt worse than his mother's rejection. "Mom doesn't mean anything by it," he said, pulling me into a hug that felt more obligatory than comforting. "She's just particular about holidays. And honestly, Ashley has been helping with Thanksgiving for years now. It's become their thing." "Their thing," I repeated, pulling back to look at him. "What about me? When do I get to have a thing with your family?" Marcus sighed, running his hands through his hair, and the gesture I'd learned meant he was feeling pressured from multiple directions. "You do have things with them. They include you in everything." "They include me the way they'd include a nice house guest," I said, surprised by the bitterness in my own voice. Politely and carefully, and with the clear understanding that I'm temporary. "That's not fair, Emma. You're being overly sensitive." Those words hung in the air between us like a challenge. Overly sensitive. It was the same phrase his mother used when I tried to address the subtle ways I was being excluded. The same dismissal I'd been hearing for months whenever I attempted to voice my growing frustration with my place in his family. That Thanksgiving I sat at their elegantly appointed table, eating Ashley's perfect stuffing, and listening to Robert praise her organizational skills while Carol gushed about how fortunate they were to have such a thoughtful daughter-in-law. I smiled and nodded and played my part, but something fundamental had shifted inside me. I was beginning to understand that no amount of effort on my part was going to change the dynamic I'd walked into, and worse, that my own husband saw my hurt as unreasonable rather than valid. The third year brought new challenges as Ashley announced she was pregnant with their third child. The news was met with such overwhelming joy and excitement that you would have thought she'd discovered a cure for cancer rather than simply achieved something millions of women do every year. Carol immediately began planning baby showers and shopping trips, discussing nursery themes and maternity fashion with the kind of enthusiasm she'd never shown for any of my accomplishments. "Ashley's glowing, isn't she?" Carol said during one of our monthly dinners at Romano's Italian Villa. "Pregnancy suits her so beautifully. She's one of those women who just blooms when she's expecting." I was 31 years old and had been married for 2 years. The question of children had come up in conversations with Marcus, but we'd decided to wait until we were more financially established and had settled into our careers. It was a practical decision that made sense for our timeline, but sitting there listening to his family celebrate Ashley's fertility, I felt the weight of yet another way I was falling short of their expectations. "When are you and Marcus going to give us some grandchildren?" Robert asked, with the kind of joking tone that wasn't really joking at all. "Ashley and Kevin are doing their part to carry on the family name. We're hoping you'll join them soon." Marcus shifted uncomfortably beside me, and I felt the familiar flash of anger that he never defended me in these moments. "We're still settling into our careers," I said evenly. "We want to be ready to give our children the attention they deserve." "Oh, but you're never really ready," Carol laughed, reaching over to pat Ashley's hand. "Are you, dear? Sometimes you just have to take the leap. And Ashley's such a natural mother, she makes it look so effortless." Ashley smiled modestly, one hand resting on her still flat stomach. "Every child is different," she said diplomatically. "But we've been so blessed with Lily and Noah. This little one will just complete our family perfectly." The conversation continued around children and parenting and the joys of expanding families, with Ashley positioned as the expert and me relegated to the role of student who hadn't yet learned her first lesson. I found myself studying her across the table, trying to understand what it was about her that inspired such devotion from Marcus's family. She was beautiful, certainly, and charming and accomplished in all the ways that mattered to people like the Thompsons. But there was something else, some quality I couldn't quite name that made her seem to fit so perfectly into their world. It was Maya, my best friend from work, who finally helped me put words to what I was experiencing. "It sounds like she's not trying to fit in," Maya said over drinks one evening after I'd spent an hour venting about the latest family gathering. "She already belongs. She grew up in their world, speaks their language, knows their rules instinctively. You're playing a game where she already knows the strategy and you're still learning the board." Maya was right, of course. Ashley hadn't had to prove herself worthy of the Thompson family's acceptance, because she'd been pre-approved by virtue of her background, her breeding, her innate understanding of their social expectations. I, on the other hand, was constantly auditioning for a role that might never be truly mine, no matter how well I performed. The realization should have been liberating, but instead it filled me with a deep sadness that I tried to hide from Marcus, and even from myself. I'd fallen in love with him believing that love would be enough to bridge any differences, that his family would eventually see my worth and embrace me fully. Instead, I was learning that some doors remained locked no matter how hard you knocked, and that the person holding the key might not even realize you were standing outside. As Ashley's pregnancy progressed, she became even more central to family gatherings. Every conversation revolved around her needs, her comfort, her preparations for the new baby. Carol organized shopping expeditions for maternity clothes and nursery furniture, while Robert made jokes about needing to expand his life insurance to cover another grandchild. Even Marcus, who had never shown particular interest in children, seemed fascinated by Ashley's pregnancy, asking thoughtful questions about her symptoms and offering to help with anything she needed. I watched it all from my position on the outside, smiling and nodding and making appropriate comments while something inside me grew colder and more distant with each passing month. The worst part wasn't their excitement about the new baby, which was natural and understandable. It was the way Ashley's pregnancy seemed to highlight everything I wasn't providing to this family, every way I was disappointing them simply by existing as myself. rather than transforming into the daughter-in-law they really wanted. The breaking point came at Ashley's baby shower, an elaborate affair held at the country club with more guests than my wedding had hosted. I'd spent weeks selecting the perfect gift, something meaningful and expensive enough to demonstrate my investment in welcoming this new family member. But when Ashley opened my carefully chosen present, a beautiful handcrafted mobile I'd commissioned from a local artist, her response was polite appreciation that somehow felt more insulting than outright criticism would have been. "How unique," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's very artistic." Carol leaned over to examine the mobile more closely, and I could see her struggling to find something positive to say. "It's certainly creative," she managed finally, "very different from what we usually see." Meanwhile, Ashley's reaction to Carol's gift, an heirloom christening gown that had been worn by generations of Thompson children, was tears of genuine joy and gratitude. She held the delicate fabric like it was made of spun gold, thanking Carol repeatedly for entrusting her with such a precious family treasure. "I can't wait for the baby to wear this," Ashley said, her voice thick with emotion. "To be part of that tradition." I sat there watching this exchange and felt something break inside me. It wasn't jealousy exactly, though there was certainly an element of that. It was the recognition that no matter what I did, no matter how hard I tried, I would never be the daughter-in-law who received family heirlooms and tears of gratitude. I would always be the one whose gifts were appreciated politely and set aside, whose contributions were acknowledged but not treasured. That evening, driving home from the shower with Marcus, I finally said what I'd been thinking for months. "Your family doesn't like me." Marcus glanced over at me, his expression carefully neutral in the way that meant he'd been expecting this conversation. "That's not true, Emma. They've always been welcoming to you." "Welcoming isn't the same as accepting," I said quietly. "And it's certainly not the same as loving." "They love you," Marcus said, but his tone lacked conviction. "It just takes them time to warm up to new people. They've known Ashley for years before she married Kevin." "It's been 3 years, Marcus. How much more time do they need?" He was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him weighing his words carefully. "My family has certain expectations. They've always been that way. It doesn't mean they don't care about you." "What kind of expectations?" I pressed, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Marcus sighed, gripping the steering wheel tighter. "They like things done a certain way. They value tradition, continuity." Ashley understands that instinctively because she grew up in a similar environment. And I didn't. "No," he said simply, "you didn't." The honesty was somehow both brutal and refreshing. Finally, someone was acknowledging what I'd been feeling for years rather than telling me I was imagining things or being too sensitive. But it also raised questions I wasn't sure I was ready to confront. "Did you know it would be like this when you married me?" I asked. Another long pause. "I hoped it would get easier." "That's not an answer." Marcus pulled into our driveway and turned off the engine, but neither of us moved to get out of the car. The silence stretched between us, filled with all the things we'd been avoiding saying for months. "I knew they might have some adjustments to make," he said finally. "But I thought that once they got to know you, once they saw how much I love you, it wouldn't matter." "But it does matter." "Yes," he said quietly, "it does." That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to process what felt like the end of something important. Not my marriage necessarily, but certainly my illusions about what that marriage could become. I'd spent 3 years trying to win over people who had never intended to be won, fighting for acceptance from people who had already decided I didn't belong. The question now was what I was going to do with that knowledge. Ashley's third child, a boy they named James, was born on a cold February morning, and the family's celebration was everything I'd expected and dreaded. Carol spent the day at the hospital, taking photos and cooing over her newest grandchild, while Robert handed out cigars at his office and called everyone he knew to share the good news. Marcus and I visited that evening, bringing flowers and a gift card to Ashley's favorite baby boutique. "Isn't he perfect?" Carol gushed as she held the tiny bundle. "He looks just like Kevin did at this age. The Thompson genes are strong in this one." Ashley looked radiant. Despite having given birth less than 12 hours earlier, her hair somehow still perfectly styled and her makeup subtly applied. She accepted congratulations and gifts with gracious appreciation, playing the role of glowing new mother as if she'd been born to it. 3 children, Robert said with obvious pride. Ashley's quite the mother. This family is truly blessed. I held baby James for the requisite amount of time, making appropriate noises about his tiny fingers and perfect features, but my heart wasn't in the performance. All I could think about was the conversation Marcus and I had been avoiding for weeks, the one about our own family planning and when we might be ready to give his parents the grandchildren they were obviously hoping for. The pressure had been building steadily since James's birth. Every family gathering included subtle hints about our timeline, gentle jokes about being next in line, and increasingly direct questions about our intentions. Carol had started forwarding me articles about fertility and age, while Robert made comments about the tax benefits of having dependents. "You don't want to wait too long," Carol said during one particularly uncomfortable dinner. "The biological clock is real, and it gets harder as you get older." Ashley was smart to start young. I was 32, hardly ancient by modern standards. But in the Thompson family's traditional worldview, I was already approaching dangerous territory. The fact that Ashley had started having children at 24 gave her a significant advantage in their eyes. One more way, she was the perfect daughter-in-law, while I was the one who couldn't quite measure up. Marcus and I had been trying for 6 months without success, though we hadn't shared that information with his family. Every month brought disappointment and growing anxiety, along with well-meaning advice from Carol about relaxation techniques and old wives' tales about conception. The pressure from his family only added to the stress we were already feeling about our apparent fertility challenges. "Maybe we should see a doctor," I suggested after another negative pregnancy test, just to make sure everything's okay. Marcus nodded, though I could see the worry in his eyes. "Yeah, that's probably a good idea. It's still early, but it wouldn't hurt to check." The fertility specialist was kind but thorough, ordering a battery of tests that revealed what we'd been dreading. I had endometriosis, a condition that could make conception significantly more difficult. It wasn't impossible, the doctor assured us, but it would likely require medical intervention and might take considerably longer than we'd hoped. "The good news is that there are many treatment options available," Dr. Williams explained during our follow-up appointment. "With proper management, many women with endometriosis go on to have successful pregnancies. But the treatment would be expensive, invasive, and emotionally draining, with no guarantees of success." As we drove home from the appointment, both of us lost in our own thoughts, I couldn't help but think about how easily pregnancy had come to Ashley, how she seemed to conceive almost effortlessly while I was learning about hormone treatments and surgical procedures. "We don't have to tell them anything yet," Marcus said as we pulled into our driveway. "Not until we're ready." But keeping the secret felt like carrying a weight that grew heavier with every family gathering. Every comment about our timeline, every joke about being next, every comparison to Ashley's fertility felt like a reminder of my body's betrayal. I found myself withdrawing from family events, making excuses to avoid the conversations that inevitably turned to children and grandchildren, and the joys of expanding families. It was during one of these tense family dinners, while Ashley was describing James's latest developmental milestones and Carol was gushing about what wonderful grandchildren they were raising, that I finally reached my breaking point. "When are you two going to catch up?" Robert asked with his usual joking tone that wasn't really joking. "Ashley and Kevin are doing their part to populate the next generation. We're still waiting for you and Marcus to contribute." I felt something snap inside me, a combination of months of disappointment and years of feeling inadequate finally boiling over into something I couldn't contain. "Maybe we don't want children," I said, my voice sharper than I'd intended. "Maybe we're perfectly happy with our life the way it is." The silence that followed was deafening. Carol's fork froze halfway to her mouth, while Robert stared at me like I'd just announced my intention to join a cult. Even Ashley looked shocked, her perfect composure cracking for just a moment. "You don't mean that," Carol said finally, her voice carefully controlled. "Every woman wants children eventually. It's natural." "What's natural is different for everyone," I replied, though my heart was pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. "Not every woman has to follow the same path." Marcus reached under the table and squeezed my hand, a warning that I was treading into dangerous territory. But I was tired of being warned off, tired of walking on eggshells around people who seemed determined to find fault with everything I did or didn't do. Well, Robert cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation had taken. I'm sure you'll change your mind when the time is right. Most young couples go through this phase. This isn't a phase, I said, though I knew I was lying. This is a choice. Ashley leaned forward slightly, her expression sympathetic in a way that somehow made everything worse. It's such a personal decision, she said gently. But I can't imagine my life without my children. They bring such joy and purpose to everything. The implication was clear, that my life lacked joy and purpose without children, that I was somehow incomplete or unfulfilled in ways I was too naive to understand. It was the same subtle condescension I'd been receiving for years, wrapped in concern and delivered with a smile. I'm sure they do, I said evenly. For you. The evening limped along after that, everyone carefully avoiding the topic of children while the tension hung in the air like a storm cloud. Marcus and I left early, claiming work obligations, and drove home in silence that felt heavier than any argument we'd ever had. You can't say things like that, Marcus said finally as we were getting ready for bed. You know how important family is to them. What about how important honesty is to me? I shot back. I'm tired of pretending to be someone I'm not, just to keep your family comfortable. You weren't being honest, Marcus pointed out. You were being provocative. There's a difference. He was right, of course. I did want children, desperately, and the fertility issues we were facing made his family's pressure even more painful to endure. But I was so tired of being the one who always had to bend, always had to accommodate, always had to smile and nod, while being found wanting in yet another area of my life. Your family doesn't respect me, I said, sitting on the edge of our bed with my back to him. They never have, and they never will. And the worst part is that you don't seem to care. That's not true, Marcus said, but his denial lacked conviction. They're just traditional. They have certain expectations. Their expectations don't include me, I said quietly. And apparently neither do yours. That night marked a turning point in our marriage. Though neither of us recognized it at the time, something had shifted between us, a crack in the foundation that would only grow wider with time. I started to see Marcus not as my partner and advocate, but as someone who would always choose his family's comfort over my well-being, who would always find ways to justify their behavior rather than defending me against it. The distance between us grew slowly but steadily over the following months. We went through the motions of fertility treatments, attending appointments and following protocols. But the joy and excitement that should have accompanied our efforts to start a family was overshadowed by the weight of his family's expectations and my growing resentment of their judgment. Ashley's success as a mother became an even more prominent feature of family gatherings as James grew from infant to toddler. She managed 3 children under 6 with the kind of grace that made parenting look effortless, always appearing calm and put together even when dealing with tantrums or tears. Carol never missed an opportunity to praise Ashley's maternal instincts, her organizational skills, her ability to balance motherhood with maintaining her appearance and social obligations. Ashley just has such a gift, Carol would say, watching Ashley manage all 3 children during family dinners. Some women are natural mothers, and she's definitely one of them. The implication, never stated but always present, was that I was not one of those women. Every month that passed without a pregnancy announcement from Marcus and me seemed to confirm their suspicions that I was either unwilling or unable to provide the grandchildren they were eagerly anticipating. It was during this period of growing tension and disappointment that I made a decision that would change everything. I stopped trying to win over Marcus's family and started focusing on building a life that made me happy regardless of their approval. I threw myself into my career with renewed energy, taking on challenging projects and building relationships with colleagues who appreciated my skills and perspective. I reconnected with friends I'd neglected while trying to fit into the Thompson family's social circle, rediscovering parts of myself that had gotten lost in the effort to become someone I thought they wanted me to be. Maya noticed the change immediately. "You seem different," she said during one of our regular happy hour sessions. "Lighter somehow." "I've stopped caring about things I can't control," I told her, which wasn't entirely true but felt like progress. If Marcus's family doesn't like me, that's their problem, not mine. But even as I was learning to build emotional walls against their rejection, I couldn't escape the growing realization that my marriage was in serious trouble. Marcus and I were like roommates who happened to share a last name, polite and considerate but increasingly distant. The fertility treatments had put additional strain on our relationship, with their demands for precise timing and medical intervention that made what should have been intimate feel clinical and scheduled. After 8 months of unsuccessful attempts to conceive, even with medical assistance, Dr. Williams suggested we consider taking a break from treatment. "Sometimes the stress of trying can actually interfere with conception," she explained during what felt like our 100th appointment. "A few months of just living your lives, without the pressure of schedules and medications, might be exactly what you need." Marcus and I agreed to the break, though I suspected we were both relieved to step away from the emotional roller coaster of monthly hope and disappointment. But the break also meant we had to face the reality of our relationship, without the distraction of shared medical goals and treatment schedules. "I don't know how to talk to you anymore," Marcus admitted one evening as we sat in our living room, both of us staring at our phones instead of each other. "It feels like everything I say is wrong." "Maybe that's because you never say anything," I replied, not looking up from my screen. "When your family criticizes me, you're silent. When they pressure us about children, you're silent. When they make me feel like I'm not good enough, you're silent." "I don't know what you want me to say," Marcus said, his voice rising slightly. "They're my family. I can't change who they are." "You could defend me," I said, finally meeting his eyes. "You could stand up for us, for our marriage, for our decisions. Instead, you act like their opinions matter more than mine." "That's not fair," Marcus protested. "You know I love you." "Do you?" I asked, the question surprising both of us with its directness. "Because loving someone means protecting them, supporting them, choosing them, and I haven't felt chosen by you in a very long time." The conversation ended there, both of us too exhausted and hurt to continue. But the question lingered between us. Did Marcus love me enough to stand up to his family's expectations, or would he always be the dutiful son who chose family harmony over his wife's happiness? I got my answer sooner than I expected, and in a way that shattered whatever remaining hope I had for our marriage. It happened on a Saturday evening in early October, exactly 4 years after that first dinner at the Thompson house where I'd been measured against Ashley and found wanting. Marcus and I had been invited to Ashley's birthday celebration at Romano's Italian Villa, the restaurant that had become the backdrop for so many of the family's significant moments. I almost declined the invitation, claiming work obligations, but Marcus had insisted we attend. "It's important to Ashley," he said, using the tone that meant he wasn't going to take no for an answer. "And you know how Mom feels when we miss family events." So I put on a dress I knew Carol would approve of, fixed my makeup, and prepared to spend another evening playing my role as the disappointing daughter-in-law who couldn't quite measure up to the family's golden child. What I didn't expect was that by the end of the night I would no longer have to worry about playing that role at all, because sometimes, when you've been walking on eggshells for so long that you forget what solid ground feels like, the universe has a way of showing you exactly where you stand. And on that October evening, with the warm lights of Romano's Italian villa casting shadows that felt more like omens than ambiance, I was about to discover that my place in the Thompson family was even more precarious than I'd ever imagined. The private dining room at Romano's Italian villa was decorated with the kind of understated elegance that screamed expensive taste. Soft white roses adorned every table, candles flickered in crystal holders, and the lighting had been adjusted to that perfect warm glow that made everyone look like they belonged in a magazine spread. Ashley's birthday celebration was, predictably, flawless in every detail. I watched from across the room as she moved through the gathered guests like a queen holding court. She wore a stunning emerald green dress that complemented her blonde hair perfectly, and every conversation she joined seemed to light up with laughter and animated discussion. This wasn't just a birthday party, I realized as I observed the guest list. This was a carefully curated social event designed to showcase Ashley's position at the center of not just the Thompson family, but their entire social circle. "Emma, you look lovely tonight," Carol said, appearing at my elbow with a glass of champagne. Her tone was warm, but I'd learned to read the subtle evaluations in her compliments. The way her eyes lingered on my dress suggested it passed inspection, though probably just barely. "Thank you," I replied, accepting the champagne. "Ashley looks radiant. You've done a beautiful job with the decorations." "Oh, I can't take credit," Carol laughed, waving her hand dismissively. "Ashley planned everything herself. She has such exquisite taste. Look at those centerpieces. Absolutely gorgeous. She found those roses at some specialty florist in Lincoln Park." Of course she did. Ashley didn't just have a birthday party, she curated an experience that would be photographed and discussed for weeks afterward. I sipped my champagne and tried to summon enthusiasm for another evening of watching the Thompson family celebrate their perfect daughter-in-law. Marcus appeared beside me, looking handsome in his navy suit and silver tie. "You okay?" he asked quietly, though his attention seemed divided between our conversation and the room full of people he needed to greet. "Fine," I said, which we both knew was code for anything but fine, just admiring Ashley's party planning skills. Marcus followed my gaze to where Ashley was laughing with a group of women from the country club, her hand resting protectively on James's back as he slept against her shoulder. Even with a sleeping baby, she managed to look effortlessly elegant. "She does throw a good party," Marcus agreed, though something in his tone made me look at him more closely. There was an admiration there that went beyond polite family obligation, and for a moment I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the restaurant's air conditioning. The evening progressed with the kind of choreographed socializing that the Thompson family had perfected over generations. Conversations flowed from business connections to social obligations to shared memories of exclusive events I'd never attended. I found myself nodding along to discussions about people I didn't know and places I'd never been, playing the role of interested observer while feeling increasingly invisible. It was during the dinner course that I first noticed the change in dynamics I'd been too distracted to see before. Marcus wasn't just being polite to Ashley, he was being attentive in a way that went beyond brotherly concern. When she mentioned that James had been fussy during his afternoon nap, Marcus immediately offered suggestions based on articles he'd read about infant sleep patterns. When she laughed at one of Robert's stories, Marcus watched her with the kind of focus usually reserved for someone you find genuinely fascinating. "Marcus has been such a help with the children," Ashley said during a lull in conversation, her hand briefly touching his arm in a gesture that seemed casual, but lingered just a moment too long. "He has such a natural way with them. James absolutely adores his Uncle Marcus." Carol beamed at this praise of her son, while Robert nodded approvingly. "Marcus always was good with children," Carol said. "Even as a boy, he had such patience with the neighbor kids. He'll make a wonderful father someday." The comment hit like a physical blow, though I tried to keep my expression neutral. We'd been trying to conceive for over a year, through medical interventions and mounting disappointment, while Ashley produced children with apparent ease. Now his family was discussing his future as a father as if I weren't sitting right there, as if my presence and our struggles were irrelevant to their vision of his life. "Speaking of which," Robert said with his usual jovial tone that carried an edge of expectation, "any news on that front, you two?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Every eye at the table turned to Marcus and me, waiting for an update on our reproductive timeline. I felt my throat tighten, knowing that any answer I gave would be inadequate. "We're still working on it," Marcus said carefully, which was both true and completely insufficient for his family's curiosity. "Well, don't wait too long," Carol said with a laugh that didn't quite mask her concern. "Ashley started having children young, which was so smart. The longer you wait, the more complicated things become." "Mother," Ashley said gently, though her tone suggested mild embarrassment rather than genuine objection. "Everyone has their own timeline. But the damage was done." The comparison had been made explicit. Ashley, the smart one who started having children young, and me, the one who was waiting too long and making things complicated. I caught Marcus's eye across the table, looking for some sign of support or defense, but he was studying his wine glass as if it contained the secrets of the universe. Of course, Carol said quickly, realizing she'd overstepped. I just mean that children bring such joy to a family. Look at how happy Kevin and Ashley are with their 3 little ones. As if summoned by her words, Kevin appeared with Lily and Noah, both freshly cleaned up from whatever adventure they'd been having in the restaurant's garden area. The children immediately gravitated toward Ashley, who somehow managed to incorporate them into the adult conversation without missing a beat. "Mommy, can we have cake now?" Lily asked, her small voice carrying clearly through the dining room. "After Uncle Marcus gives his speech, sweetheart," Ashley said, smoothing Lily's hair with practiced maternal grace. "Remember what we talked about? Good things come to those who wait." I watched this exchange with growing unease, not because of anything Ashley did wrong, but because of the way Marcus was watching it. There was something in his expression that I'd never seen before, a kind of longing that had nothing to do with brotherly affection, and everything to do with the life Ashley represented. When Marcus stood to give his speech celebrating Ashley's birthday, I felt a premonition of disaster that I couldn't quite articulate. He spoke beautifully about family and tradition, about the importance of having someone like Ashley who understood what mattered and made everyone around her better. He talked about her grace under pressure, her natural abilities as a mother, and her gift for bringing people together. "Ashley isn't just Kevin's wife or my sister-in-law," Marcus said, raising his glass toward her. "She's become the heart of this family, the person who shows us all what it means to live with purpose and joy. We're all better people because she's in our lives." The applause was enthusiastic, and Ashley's smile was radiant as she accepted the toast. But I caught something in her expression as she looked at Marcus, a moment of connection that felt far too intimate for a family gathering. When their eyes met across the table, there was a current of understanding that excluded everyone else in the room, including me. The realization hit me like a physical blow. My husband was in love with his brother's wife. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced smiles and mechanical responses to conversation I wasn't really hearing. I watched Marcus and Ashley interact with new eyes, seeing the subtle ways they found excuses to talk to each other, the slightly too long eye contact, the careful distance they maintained that somehow felt more intimate than if they'd been standing together. I observed Kevin's oblivious contentment as he played with his children, completely unaware of the undercurrents swirling around his marriage. When we finally said our goodbyes and walked to the car, I felt like I was moving through water, everything distant and muffled except for the sharp clarity of my growing certainty. Marcus was quiet during the drive home, but it wasn't the comfortable silence of a couple who'd enjoyed an evening together. It was the weighted quiet of someone lost in thoughts they couldn't share. "Nice party," I said finally, testing the waters. "Yeah," Marcus replied, his voice distracted. "Ashley really outdid herself." "She always does." Marcus glanced at me, perhaps hearing something in my tone that made him wary. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," I said, though we both knew it meant everything. "She's perfect, just like your family always says." "Emma, don't start." "Start what?" I asked, though I could feel the anger building in my chest like pressure in a kettle. "Pointing out the obvious? Your family worships her, Marcus. And apparently, so do you. That's ridiculous," Marcus said. But his denial lacked conviction. "She's family." "Family," I repeated, testing the word. "Is that what you call the way you look at her?" Marcus pulled into our driveway and turned off the engine, but neither of us moved to get out of the car. The silence stretched between us, filled with accusations I wasn't ready to make and denials he wasn't ready to offer. "I don't know what you think you saw," Marcus said finally, his voice carefully controlled. "I saw my husband giving a speech about another woman that sounded more like a love letter than a birthday toast," I said, surprised by how steady my voice remained. "I saw you watching her like she hung the moon. I saw you two having some kind of moment that had nothing to do with family and everything to do with feelings you shouldn't be having." "You're being paranoid," Marcus said, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. "Am I asked. "Because right now, you're sitting in our driveway defending your feelings for your brother's wife, instead of reassuring your own wife that I'm imagining things." Marcus finally looked at me, and in his expression I saw confirmation of everything I'd feared. He didn't deny the feelings. didn't protest his innocence, didn't fight for our marriage. He just looked tired, like a man who'd been carrying a secret that had finally become too heavy to bear. "It's not what you think," he said quietly. "Then tell me what it is," I challenged him. "Tell me what I should think about my husband being in love with someone else." "I'm not in love with her," Marcus said, but even he seemed to realize how unconvincing that sounded. "You're a terrible liar," I said, getting out of the car before I said something I couldn't take back. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, while Marcus slept beside me, or pretended to sleep. I replayed every interaction I'd witnessed, every look and gesture and moment of connection between my husband and Ashley. How long had this been going on? How had I been so blind to what was happening right in front of me? More importantly, what was I going to do about it? The answer came to me slowly over the following weeks as I watched Marcus and Ashley interact at family gatherings with new understanding. They were careful, I had to give them credit for that. Nothing they did could be called inappropriate by outside observers. But once you knew what to look for, the signs were everywhere. The way Marcus always offered to help Ashley with the children, the way Ashley always seemed to need his particular brand of assistance, the way they found excuses to have private conversations about child development or family logistics. It was Maya who finally forced me to confront what I was seeing. "You look like hell," she said during one of our weekly happy hours, studying my face with the kind of blunt assessment that only best friends can get away with. "What's going on?" I told her everything. The birthday party, the speech, the growing certainty that my marriage was built on a foundation that had been crumbling for months without my knowledge. Maya listened without interruption, occasionally wincing at particularly painful details. "So what are you going to do?" she asked when I finished. "I don't know," I admitted. Part of me wants to confront him, force him to admit what's happening. But another part of me is terrified of what he might say. "Emma," Maya said gently, "you can't live in limbo forever. You deserve to know where you stand." "Do I?" I asked. "Because right now, I have a husband who pays the bills, and shows up to social events, and sleeps in my bed every night. If I force this conversation, I might end up with nothing." "You might end up with nothing anyway," Maya pointed out. "At least if you confront it, you'll have the truth." But I wasn't ready for the truth, not yet. Instead, I found myself becoming a detective in my own life, looking for evidence of the affair I was increasingly certain was happening. I checked Marcus's phone when he was in the shower, searched his email when he left his laptop open, and found nothing. Whatever was happening between him and Ashley, they were smart enough not to leave a digital trail. The real evidence was in the small changes noticed in Marcus himself. He started working late more often, claiming depositions and client meetings that seemed to multiply as the weeks passed. He became more critical of me in subtle ways, pointing out when I was tired or stressed or less than perfectly put together. He grew impatient with my questions about his day and distant during conversations about our future. Most telling of all, he stopped trying to defend his family's treatment of me. When Carol made one of her pointed comments about my career priorities or my failure to produce grandchildren, Marcus no longer offered even token support. He just sat there, letting the criticism wash over me as if I deserved it. The breaking point came in early November, just 3 weeks before Thanksgiving. We were having dinner at the Thompson house, another of Carol's elaborate Sunday meals designed to showcase the family's togetherness and prosperity. Ashley was there with all 3 children, looking stunning despite having given birth to James less than 10 months earlier. She'd somehow managed to lose all her pregnancy weight while maintaining the kind of glowing health that suggested expensive personal trainers and nutritionists. "Emma, you're looking thin," Carol observed as we sat down to dinner. "Are you eating enough? You need to keep your strength up, especially if you're hoping to get pregnant soon." The comment was delivered with Carol's usual blend of concern and criticism, suggesting that my appearance was somehow both inadequate and potentially responsible for our fertility struggles. I felt my jaw clench, but before I could respond, Ashley jumped in with what seemed like support. "Oh, I think Emma looks wonderful," Ashley said with a bright smile. "That jacket is so flattering on you. Where did you find it?" It should have been a kindness, but something in Ashley's tone made it feel like another evaluation. The way she complimented my jacket felt less like genuine appreciation and more like the kind of polite observation you'd make about a child's art project. "Thank you," I said evenly. "I got it at Nordstrom." "Such a good store," Ashley agreed. "I love their personal shopping service. It's so helpful when you don't have time to really browse." The implication was subtle but clear, that I had bought something off the rack while she had access to personalized service, that my fashion choices reflected a lack of sophistication rather than simple preference. It was the kind of insult disguised as conversation that Ashley had perfected over the years. But what really caught my attention was Marcus's reaction. Instead of changing the subject or defending me, he was nodding along as if Ashley's assessment of my shopping habits was both reasonable and insightful. "Emma's always been practical about clothes," he said, which somehow managed to sound like both an agreement and an apology. "Practical can be good," Robert said with the tone of someone trying to find something positive to say about a disappointing situation. "Not everyone needs to be fashion-forward." I sat there listening to my husband and his family discuss my shortcomings as if I weren't present, feeling something inside me grow cold and hard. This wasn't just about clothes or shopping or any of the surface-level criticisms they were making. This was about my place in this family, my value as a person, my right to be treated with basic respect. "Excuse me," I said, standing abruptly from the table. "I need some air." I walked out to the back patio, grateful for the November chill that matched my mood. Through the dining room windows, I could see the family continuing their meal, as if nothing had happened. Ashley was cutting food for Lily while simultaneously bouncing James on her lap, the picture of maternal competence. Marcus was deep in conversation with his father about some business matter, apparently unbothered by his wife's departure from the table. I stood there in the cold, watching this tableau of domestic perfection, and finally understood what I'd been refusing to see for months. I didn't just not belong in this family, I was actively unwanted. They tolerated me because Marcus had married me, but given their choice, they would replace me with someone more suitable to their standards. Someone like Ashley. And Marcus, I was beginning to realize, would be perfectly fine with that arrangement. When I finally went back inside, the conversation had moved on to holiday planning. Carol was discussing Thanksgiving menu options with Ashley while the men debated football playoffs. No one acknowledged my return or asked if I was feeling better. It was as if I'd never left at all. "We should do the usual menu," Ashley was saying as I retook my seat. "The traditional dishes are what make it feel like Thanksgiving." Although I was thinking we could add that sweet potato casserole recipe I found in Food and Wine, it got rave reviews. "That sounds perfect," Carol agreed. "You have such good instincts about these things. Emma, you'll help with the preparation, won't you?" The question was phrased as an invitation, but it felt more like an assignment. "Of course," I said, though I wondered what exactly I'd be helping with, given that Ashley seemed to have taken over the planning entirely. "Wonderful," Carol said. "Ashley will coordinate everything. She's become quite the expert at managing our holiday meals." I looked around the table, taking in the faces of people who had never really wanted me there, who had spent 4 years waiting for me to transform into someone more acceptable, who had finally given up hope of that transformation. The only thing that surprised me was how little it hurt anymore. The sharp pain of rejection had been worn down by repetition into something more like numbness. "Actually," I said, the words coming out before I'd fully formed the thought, "I don't think I'll be able to make it to Thanksgiving this year." The silence that followed was immediate and complete. Every conversation stopped. Every fork paused halfway to its destination. Every eye turned toward me with expressions ranging from confusion to disapproval. "What do you mean?" Carol asked, her voice carefully controlled. "I mean, I won't be attending Thanksgiving dinner," I said, surprised by how calm I sounded. "I have other plans." "What other plans?" Marcus asked, his tone suggesting that no plan could possibly be more important than family obligation. "I'm visiting my parents in Texas," I said, which wasn't true but felt like it should be. "I haven't spent a holiday with them since we got married." "But this is family," Robert said, as if that settled the matter. "Thanksgiving is about being with family." "My parents are family too," I pointed out. "And they're getting older. I should spend some time with them while I can." The logic was unassailable, but I could see that logic wasn't really the issue. The issue was that I was disrupting their carefully planned holiday celebration, challenging their assumption that Marcus's family automatically took precedence over mine. "We could visit your parents another time," Marcus said, though his tone suggested he had no intention of making such a visit. "Thanksgiving is important to my family." "And apparently I'm not," I said quietly. "That's not what I said," Marcus protested, but his defense was half-hearted. "It's what you meant," I replied. "Your family is important, their traditions matter, their preferences take priority. Where exactly do I fit into that hierarchy?" Ashley cleared her throat gently, drawing attention back to herself. "Maybe we could work something out," she suggested, with the kind of diplomatic tone that suggested she was trying to solve a minor scheduling conflict. "If Emma needs to visit her parents, perhaps Marcus could join us for Thanksgiving and they could travel to Texas another weekend." The suggestion was presented as a compromise, but it felt more like a solution to a problem no one wanted to acknowledge. If I wasn't going to be present to disrupt their perfect family gathering, then they could simply proceed without me. Marcus could attend their celebration unencumbered by a wife who didn't quite fit their vision of family harmony. "That's not a bad idea," Carol said, warming to the concept. "Marcus shouldn't have to miss Thanksgiving because of travel plans." I looked at my husband, waiting for him to object to the suggestion that we spend our first major holiday apart, waiting for him to insist that we were a unit and would make decisions together. Instead, I saw him considering Ashley's proposal as if it were a reasonable solution to a practical problem. "I suppose that could work," Marcus said slowly. "If Emma really feels like she needs to visit her parents?" The casual way he agreed to spend Thanksgiving without me was like a slap across the face. Not only was he willing to let me go, he seemed relieved by the possibility. The family celebration would be more pleasant without my disruptive presence, more harmonious without someone who didn't understand their traditions and expectations. "Fine," I said, standing from the table again. "That sounds like it would work perfectly for everyone." This time when I left the dining room, I didn't stop at the patio. I walked through the house, collected my purse from the front hall table, and headed for the door. Behind me, I could hear Marcus calling my name, but I didn't turn around. I was done being the inconvenient wife who complicated their perfect family dynamic. If they wanted to celebrate Thanksgiving without me, then that's exactly what they would get. The drive home gave me time to think about what I'd just done and what it meant for my marriage. I'd essentially announced my intention to skip the most important family gathering of the year, openly challenged Marcus's priorities, and walked out of his parents' house in front of the entire family. There would be consequences for this rebellion, I knew, but for the first time in months I felt like I could breathe. Marcus arrived home an hour later, his expression carefully neutral in the way that meant he was furious but trying to control himself. "That was quite a performance," he said, hanging his coat in the front closet with more precision than the task required. "Was it?" I asked from the living room couch where I was pretending to read a magazine. I thought I was just making conversation about holiday plans. "You embarrassed me," Marcus said, joining me in the living room but remaining standing. "My entire family was there, Emma. You can't just storm out of dinner because you don't like the conversation." "Actually, I can," I said, looking up from my magazine. "I'm an adult woman with agency over my own actions. If I want to leave a situation that's making me uncomfortable, I have every right to do that." "What was making you uncomfortable?" Marcus asked, though his tone suggested he thought I was being overly sensitive. "Your family spent the entire evening criticizing me," I said, setting down the magazine and finally meeting his eyes. "My appearance, my shopping habits, my career priorities, my failure to produce children on their timeline. And you sat there nodding along, like you agreed with every word." "They weren't criticizing you," Marcus protested. "They were making conversation. They were making judgments," I corrected him, "and you were enabling them. When's the last time you defended me, Marcus? When's the last time you told your family that their treatment of me was unacceptable?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, probably because we both knew the answer was never. He had never once stood up to his family on my behalf, never once made it clear that I was his priority, never once insisted that they treat me with the respect due to his wife. "My family isn't perfect," Marcus said finally, "but they're important to me. I need you to try harder to get along with them." "I need you to try harder to be my husband," I shot back. "Partners defend each other, Marcus. They don't throw each other under the bus to keep peace with Mommy and Daddy. That's not what I'm doing, Marcus said, but his denial sounded hollow even to him. Isn't it? I asked. Because when Ashley suggested that you attend Thanksgiving without me, you agreed immediately. You didn't even hesitate. You were relieved at the idea of celebrating the holiday without your inconvenient wife. I was trying to find a solution that worked for everyone, Marcus said. Everyone except me, I pointed out. The solution that works for me is having my husband choose our marriage over his family's comfort. But apparently, that's not an option you're willing to consider. Marcus ran his hands through his hair, a gesture that used to seem endearing but now just looked like frustration with my unreasonable expectations. What do you want from me, Emma? He asked. Do you want me to cut ties with my family? Do you want me to choose between you and them? I want you to want to choose me, I said quietly. I want you to think that defending your wife is more important than keeping your family happy. I want you to love me enough to stand up for us. I do love you, Marcus said, but it sounded automatic, like a response he'd been trained to give. Do you? I asked. Because love looks different than this, Marcus. Love protects and supports and chooses the beloved over convenience. What you're doing feels more like obligation. The conversation ended there, both of us too exhausted and hurt to continue. But something fundamental had shifted between us, and we both knew there was no going back to the careful politeness we'd been maintaining for months. Over the next few days, Marcus made token efforts to repair the damage from our fight. He brought me flowers from the grocery store, suggested we go out for dinner, and even proposed a weekend trip to Wisconsin Dells that we both knew would never happen. But his heart wasn't in the gestures, and mine wasn't in receiving them. Meanwhile, his family's reaction to my Thanksgiving rebellion became clear through a series of increasingly pointed communications. Carol called twice to discuss the importance of family traditions and the hurt feelings my absence would cause. Robert sent a lengthy email about the significance of gratitude and togetherness during the holiday season. Even Kevin reached out, suggesting that family disputes should be resolved privately rather than through dramatic exits from dinner parties. The only person who didn't contact me was Ashley, which somehow felt more ominous than all the others combined. She was too smart to insert herself directly into family drama, but I knew she was watching and calculating, and probably feeling relieved that the problematic sister-in-law was removing herself from their perfect celebration. A week before Thanksgiving, Marcus made one final attempt to convince me to change my mind. It's not too late, he said over breakfast, not looking up from his newspaper. If you want to attend Thanksgiving, I'm sure we could work something out with your parents. The offer was half-hearted, and we both knew it. He was going through the motions of being a considerate husband, while secretly hoping I'd stick to my original plan. I've already made arrangements, I lied. My flight leaves Wednesday morning. Marcus nodded, still not meeting my eyes. Right, well, I guess I'll see you when you get back. I guess you will. But as I watched him fold his newspaper and prepare for another day at the office, I wondered if that was really true. Something was ending between us, and we both knew it. The question was whether either of us cared enough to fight for what was left. The answer, I was beginning to suspect, was no. Wednesday morning arrived gray and cold, matching my mood as I packed a suitcase I had no intention of using for a trip to Texas. The lie about visiting my parents had grown more elaborate over the past week, complete with fake flight confirmations I'd shown Marcus, and detailed stories about my mother's desire to recreate childhood Thanksgiving traditions. It was easier than admitting the truth, that I had nowhere to go and no real plan beyond avoiding the Thompson family celebration that would undoubtedly showcase everything I could never be. Marcus left for work early that morning, kissing my cheek with the kind of perfunctory affection that had become our default over the past months. Have a safe flight, he said, already mentally preparing for his day at the office and the family gathering that evening. Tell your parents I said hello. I will, I replied, though we both knew he'd never shown much interest in my parents beyond the basic politeness required at our wedding. The fact that he wasn't even slightly curious about my sudden need to reconnect with my family should have been telling, but by then I'd stopped expecting emotional intelligence from my husband. After Marcus left, I sat in our empty apartment staring at the suitcase I'd packed with clothes I wouldn't need and toiletries for a trip I wasn't taking. The reality of my situation hit me like a physical weight. I was a woman alone on Thanksgiving, hiding from my in-laws, lying to my husband, and too proud to call my actual parents and admit that my marriage was falling apart. Maya had invited me to join her family's celebration in Oak Park, an offer I'd declined because accepting it would mean admitting out loud that my own marriage was too broken to sustain a simple holiday meal. Instead, I'd chosen isolation, which felt both pathetic and somehow necessary. I needed time to think without the pressure of performing happiness for other people's comfort. By noon, I'd worked up the courage to call my mother in Austin. The conversation was brief and careful, both of us dancing around the obvious question of why I was calling on Thanksgiving morning instead of preparing for dinner with my husband's family. "How are things, Misha?" my mother asked in the warm voice that could still make me feel like a child seeking comfort. "They're fine, Mom," I lied, staring out my apartment window at the empty parking lot below. "Just wanted to hear your voice before things get busy with dinner preparations." "That's nice, honey. Give Marcus and his family our love. I hope you have a wonderful celebration." The simple assumption that I would be surrounded by family who loved me was almost enough to break my resolve. I wanted to tell her everything. About Ashley's perfect performance, about Marcus's growing distance, about the way I felt invisible in my own marriage. Instead, I made appropriate noises about turkey and stuffing, and hung up feeling more isolated than before. The afternoon stretched endlessly ahead of me. I tried reading, attempted to organize closets that were already organized, and even considered going to a movie just to be around other people. But every activity felt hollow when I knew that across town, the Thompson family was gathering for their traditional feast, probably relieved by my absence even as they maintained the fiction of missing me. Around 3 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Arrived at parents' house. Everyone sends their love. Hope your flight was smooth." The casual nature of the message stung more than an accusation would have. He wasn't checking on my emotional state, or expressing how much he missed me on our first holiday apart. He was simply reporting in, the way you might update a business partner about a routine appointment. I typed and deleted several responses before settling on, "Thanks. Give everyone my best." It was perfectly polite and completely empty, which seemed appropriate for the state of our relationship. As evening approached, I found myself doing something I'd sworn I wouldn't do: stalking the Thompson family's social media accounts. Carol had posted a series of photos from their Thanksgiving preparation, showing Ashley arranging flowers while managing all 3 children with apparent ease. The images were like something from a lifestyle magazine: soft lighting, coordinated outfits, and the kind of effortless elegance that suggested hours of careful preparation. The photos told a story of family harmony and traditional values, with Ashley positioned as the capable daughter-in-law who understood what mattered. There was even a picture of her and Marcus working together in the kitchen, both of them laughing at some shared joke, while Carol looked on with obvious approval. The caption read, "So grateful for family who make every gathering special. #blessed, #family, #traditions." I stared at that photo for longer than I cared to admit, studying the body language between Marcus and Ashley, the comfortable familiarity of their interaction, the way they seemed to exist in their own bubble of shared understanding. Whatever was happening between them, it was progressing beyond the careful boundaries they'd maintained in my presence. The comments on Carol's post were equally illuminating. Friends and extended family members gushed about the beautiful table settings, Ashley's gorgeous children, and the Thompson family's commitment to maintaining traditions. Several people specifically mentioned how lucky the family was to have Ashley, how she embodied everything a daughter-in-law should be. No one mentioned my absence. By 8 o'clock that evening, I was emotionally wrung out from my day of self-imposed exile. I'd ordered Chinese takeout and was eating it directly from the containers while watching mindless television, feeling sorry for myself in ways that would have embarrassed me if anyone had been there to witness it. That's when my phone rang with a call from Kevin. "Emma?" His voice sounded strange, uncertain in a way that immediately put me on alert. "Are you still in Texas?" "Yes," I lied automatically, though something in his tone made me wonder why he was asking. "Why?" There was a long pause, filled with background noise that sounded like family conversation and children playing. I wanted to check on you, make sure you were okay." I'm fine, I said carefully. Is everything all right there? Another pause, longer this time. Emma, can I ask you something? And will you give me an honest answer? My heart started beating faster, though I couldn't have said why. Of course. Have you noticed anything different about Marcus and Ashley lately? The question hung in the air between us like a bomb waiting to explode. Kevin wasn't calling to check on my travel arrangements or wish me a happy holiday. He was calling because he'd seen what I'd been seeing, noticed what I'd been noticing, and needed someone else to confirm that he wasn't imagining things. What do you mean? I asked, though we both knew exactly what he meant. They've been spending a lot of time together, Kevin said slowly, as if testing each word before releasing it. Talking about things that don't really involve me. Making plans together. And tonight. What happened tonight? They disappeared for over an hour, Kevin said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Said they were going for a walk to help with digestion, but it's 30 degrees outside and they were gone long enough that Mom started asking questions. I closed my eyes, feeling the ground shift beneath me, even though I was sitting still. Did anyone else notice? Mom and Dad were busy with the kids and cleanup, Kevin said. But I noticed. And when they came back, they both looked, I don't know how to describe it. Guilty, maybe? Like they'd been caught doing something they shouldn't. The confirmation of my worst suspicions should have felt like vindication. But instead, it felt like a death sentence. My marriage was over, Kevin's marriage was in danger, and we were both finding out on Thanksgiving evening while our spouses were presumably together at his parents' house. Kevin, I said gently, what are you going to do with this information? I don't know, he admitted. I keep telling myself I'm imagining things, that I'm being paranoid, but then I see the way they look at each other, and I know I'm not crazy. You're not crazy, I confirmed, and saying it out loud felt like stepping off a cliff. I've been seeing it too. We talked for another 20 minutes, comparing observations and building a case neither of us wanted to make. Kevin had noticed the increased texting between Marcus and Ashley, the way they found excuses to be alone together, the subtle intimacy of their interactions that went beyond normal family relationships. I shared my own observations from recent family gatherings, the speech at Ashley's birthday party, and the growing distance between Marcus and me that coincided with his increased attention to his sister-in-law. The worst part, Kevin said as our conversation wound down, is that everyone thinks she's perfect. My parents, her parents, all our friends. If I accuse her of having an affair with my brother, who's going to believe me? What about Marcus? I asked. Would your parents believe their golden son was capable of betraying his marriage and his brother? Kevin's laugh was bitter. Marcus can do no wrong in their eyes. If something was happening, they'd find a way to blame it on us for not being good enough spouses. The truth of that statement hit like a physical blow. Even if we had concrete evidence of an affair, the Thompson family's first instinct would be to protect Marcus and Ashley while finding fault with Kevin and me. We were the expendable ones, the ones who didn't quite fit their vision of family perfection. I should go, Kevin said finally. They'll start wondering where I am. Kevin, I said before he could hang up, we need to be smart about this. If we're right about what's happening, we need evidence before we make any accusations. I know, he said. I just don't know if I'm strong enough to keep pretending everything is normal while I'm watching my wife fall in love with my brother. After Kevin hung up, I sat in my empty apartment processing the implications of our conversation. It was one thing to suspect your husband was developing feelings for another woman. It was another thing entirely to have those suspicions confirmed by the woman's husband. The affair was real, progressing, and happening right under the noses of a family who would rather blame the victims than acknowledge the betrayal. I spent the rest of that evening making plans I hoped I'd never have to execute. I researched divorce attorneys, calculated my financial resources, and began mentally preparing for a life that didn't include Marcus or his family. It felt premature and necessary at the same time, like buying insurance for a disaster you could see approaching. Friday morning brought a text from Marcus that was so casual it felt like an insult. Hope you had a nice Thanksgiving, family missed you, flying back today? I stared at the message for a long time before responding. The idea that they'd missed me was laughable, given the evidence Kevin had provided about Marcus and Ashley's disappearing act. But the bigger issue was Marcus's assumption that I would maintain our charade of normalcy, that I would pretend to return from a trip I'd never taken and resume our marriage as if nothing had changed. "Flight delayed," I texted back. "Won't be home until late tonight." It wasn't entirely a lie. My flight back to reality was definitely delayed, and it would be late before I was ready to face whatever came next. I spent Friday wandering around Chicago, visiting museums and coffee shops and bookstores, trying to remember who I was outside of my role as Marcus Thompson's disappointing wife. It was a strange kind of freedom, being anonymous in my own city, observing other people's lives without having to perform happiness or success for their benefit. In the Art Institute, standing in front of a painting that depicted a woman alone in a garden, I had what felt like an epiphany. The woman in the painting looked contemplative, rather than lonely, self-possessed rather than abandoned. There was dignity in her solitude, strength in her independence. For the first time in months, I could envision a life where being alone didn't equal being diminished. That evening, I finally returned to my apartment to prepare for Marcus's homecoming. I had spent the day building emotional armor for the conversations that lay ahead, but I wasn't prepared for what I found when I walked through our front door. Marcus was already home, sitting at our kitchen table with his laptop open and papers spread around him. He looked up when I entered, and his expression was guilty in a way that immediately put me on high alert. "You're back early," I said, setting down my purse and studying his face. "How was the rest of the holiday?" "Fine," Marcus said quickly, closing his laptop as if it contained state secrets. "How was your family?" "They were good," I lied, maintaining our mutual deception. "My mother sends her love." Marcus nodded absently, but his attention seemed divided between our conversation and whatever he'd been working on before I arrived. The papers on the table appeared to be legal documents, which wasn't unusual given his profession, but something about his body language suggested they were more personal than professional. "What are you working on?" I asked, moving closer to the table. "Just some research," Marcus said, gathering the papers together with obvious haste. "Nothing important." But I'd caught a glimpse of the letterhead on one of the documents, and my blood ran cold. It was from a family law firm, the kind that specialized in divorce proceedings and asset division. Marcus wasn't just having an emotional affair with Ashley, he was actively planning to end our marriage. "Marcus," I said carefully, "is there something you want to tell me?" For a moment, I thought he might actually be honest with me. His expression suggested he was weighing his options, deciding whether to continue the charade or finally acknowledge what we both knew was happening. But then his lawyer training kicked in, and he slid back into the careful neutrality he'd been maintaining for months. "I don't know what you mean," he said, though his eyes wouldn't meet mine. "The papers you were just looking at," I pressed. "They're from a divorce attorney." Marcus's face went pale, confirming what I'd already suspected. "Those aren't what you think they are." "Then what are they?" "Just some general information," Marcus said weakly. "Hypothetical research." "Hypothetical research about ending our marriage?" The accusation hung in the air between us, and I could see Marcus calculating his response. He could continue lying, but we both knew I'd seen enough to piece together the truth. He could confess everything, but that would require an emotional honesty he'd been avoiding for months. Or he could try to turn the conversation around, make it my fault somehow that he was researching divorce proceedings. He chose the third option. "Maybe if you hadn't stormed out of Thanksgiving dinner and refused to come to the family celebration, we wouldn't be having these problems," Marcus said, his voice taking on an edge of accusation. "So this is my fault?" I asked, genuinely amazed by his audacity. "You're researching how to divorce me because I didn't want to spend Thanksgiving being criticized by your family?" "You don't try, Emma," Marcus said, warming to his theme. "You don't make an effort to fit in, to understand what's important to them. You just sit there judging them and waiting for them to fail to meet your standards." "My standards?" I repeated incredulously. "My standards include being treated with basic respect and having my husband defend me when his family treats me poorly. If those standards are too high, then we definitely have a problem." "They don't treat you poorly," Marcus protested. They include you in everything, they're polite and welcoming. But you're always looking for reasons to be offended. The revisionist history was breathtaking in its dishonesty. Marcus was rewriting years of subtle cruelty and exclusion as minor misunderstandings that could have been resolved if I'd just been more accommodating. He was making me the villain in a story where I'd been the victim, the problem in a marriage that was failing because of his emotional infidelity. Is that what Ashley tells you? I asked, the question emerging before I'd fully formed the thought. Marcus went very still, his expression freezing in a way that confirmed everything Kevin and I had suspected. What's that supposed to mean? He asked, but his voice lacked conviction. It means I know, Marcus, I said, feeling oddly calm now that the truth was finally in the open. I know about your feelings for Ashley. I know about the inappropriate relationship you two have been developing. And I know you're planning to leave me for her. That's ridiculous, Marcus said, but he was a terrible liar when caught off guard. Ashley is married to my brother. Ashley is married to your brother and having an emotional affair with you, I corrected him. The question is whether you're planning to make it physical before or after you divorce me. Marcus stood up from the table, his movements sharp with anger or panic. You're paranoid, Emma. You see conspiracies everywhere because you can't accept that maybe the problem is you, not everyone else. Kevin called me last night, I said quietly, and watched all the color drain from Marcus's face. He's noticed the same things I have. So unless Kevin and I are both paranoid, I think we have a real problem here. The mention of Kevin seemed to break something in Marcus's composure. He ran his hands through his hair and began pacing around our small kitchen like a caged animal. Kevin doesn't understand, Marcus said finally. He doesn't see how unhappy Ashley is, how much she's changed since having James. She needs support right now, and I'm trying to help her. Support, I repeated. Is that what you call it when you disappear with your brother's wife for over an hour during family dinner? Marcus stopped pacing and stared at me. How do you know about that? Because Kevin told me, I said. Because her husband noticed when she went missing with you for an hour and came back looking guilty. Because everyone can see what's happening except the two of you. Nothing happened, Marcus said, but his protest sounded hollow even to him. Maybe not yet, I agreed. But something's going to happen, isn't it? That's why you're researching divorce attorneys. You're planning to leave me so you can be with Ashley. Marcus didn't deny it this time. He just stood there looking trapped and resentful, as if I was the one creating problems by pointing out his betrayal. Ashley understands me, he said finally, and the words hit like a slap. She understands my family, my obligations, what's important to me. You've never really tried to understand any of that. Ashley grew up in your world, I pointed out. She didn't have to try to understand it because she was born into it. But more importantly, she doesn't challenge it. She doesn't ask you to be better or expect you to defend the people you claim to love. She doesn't make everything about herself, Marcus shot back. She thinks about the family, about what's best for everyone, not just her own feelings. The comparison was brutal in its clarity. In Marcus's mind, Ashley was the selfless woman who put family harmony above personal needs, while I was the selfish wife who expected too much consideration. The fact that Ashley's selflessness primarily benefited herself and her position in the family was apparently irrelevant to his assessment. So you've made your choice, I said, surprised by how steady my voice remained. Ashley is the woman you want to be with, and I'm the inconvenient wife you need to dispose of. It's not that simple, Marcus said, though we both knew it was exactly that simple. It's simple enough, I replied. You're in love with your brother's wife, you're planning to divorce me, and you're trying to make it my fault so you don't have to feel guilty about it. Marcus opened his mouth to protest, then seemed to realize there was no point in continuing the charade. What do you want me to say, Emma? That I'm sorry? That I never meant for this to happen? I want you to say something honest, I said. Just once, I want you to tell me the truth instead of trying to manage my reaction to it. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice was softer but no less devastating. I love her, he said simply. I've been trying not to, but I do. And she loves me too. The confession should have destroyed me, but instead it felt like relief. Finally, we were dealing with reality instead of the careful fiction we'd been maintaining for months. "What about Kevin?" I asked. Marcus's face darkened. "Kevin doesn't appreciate what he has. He takes Ashley for granted, treats her like a household manager instead of recognizing how special she is." "What about your marriage vows? What about the commitment you made to me? What about the life I could have with someone who actually wants to be part of my family?" Marcus countered. "Someone who doesn't see my parents as the enemy or treat family obligations like personal attacks?" We stared at each other across our kitchen, both of us finally acknowledging the fundamental incompatibility that had been destroying our marriage from the beginning. I wanted a husband who would choose me over his family's comfort. He wanted a wife who would never ask him to make that choice. I needed a partner who would defend me. He needed someone who would never require defending. "So what happens now?" I asked. "I don't know," Marcus admitted. "Ashley and I haven't made any definitive plans. But you've discussed it." "We've talked about it, yes." The casual admission that my husband and his sister-in-law had been discussing the end of both their marriages felt like the final nail in the coffin of whatever relationship Marcus and I had left. "And what about Kevin and me?" I asked. "Do we get any say in these plans you've been making?" Marcus's expression turned defensive again. "Kevin will be fine. He's young, successful, attractive. He'll find someone else who appreciates him." "And me?" Marcus looked at me for a long moment, and I could see him weighing his words carefully. "You deserve someone who can give you what you need, Emma. Someone who doesn't come with family complications that you can't handle." The dismissal was complete and brutal. I wasn't just losing my husband to another woman. I was being told that I was fundamentally incompatible with the life he wanted, too emotionally needy and socially inadequate to function in his world. "I see," I said, though I wasn't sure I saw anything clearly anymore. "Emma," Marcus started, but I held up a hand to stop him. "I think I need some time to process this," I said. "Maybe you should stay somewhere else tonight." Marcus nodded, looking almost relieved to be free of the conversation. "I'll pack a bag." As I watched my husband gather clothes and toiletries for what we both knew was more than a one-night absence, I felt something inside me crystallize into cold, hard resolve. Marcus and Ashley thought they could dismantle 2 marriages and rebuild their lives on the wreckage without consequences. They believed they could hurt Kevin and me while maintaining their positions as the family favorites, the golden couple who deserved happiness more than the inconvenient spouses they were discarding. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The silence in my apartment after Marcus left was deafening. For 4 years, our home had been filled with the sounds of his presence, the clatter of his keys on the kitchen counter, the hum of his electric toothbrush, the rustle of newspaper pages turning over morning coffee. Now there was nothing but the mechanical whisper of the heating system and the distant hum of traffic from the street below. I sat on our couch, staring at the indentation in the cushion where Marcus used to sit, trying to process the magnitude of what had just occurred. My marriage was over, not because of some gradual growing apart or fundamental incompatibility, but because my husband had fallen in love with his brother's wife and decided I was too much trouble to keep around. The casual cruelty of it was almost breathtaking. Sleep that night was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Marcus and Ashley disappearing together during Thanksgiving dinner, sharing secrets and touches that belonged to other people. I pictured them planning their future while their spouses remained oblivious, calculating how to dismantle 2 families without taking responsibility for the damage they were causing. By morning, I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. My eyes were swollen from crying, my head pounded from stress, and my entire body ached with the kind of exhaustion that comes from emotional trauma. But there was also something else, something harder and colder settling in my chest where the pain had been. Anger, maybe, or determination. I wasn't sure which, but it felt more useful than despair. The first call came at 8:30 in the morning from Carol, her voice tight with barely controlled fury. "Emma, I think we need to have a conversation," she said without preamble. "Marcus told us about your discussion last night." Of course he had. Marcus couldn't even end our marriage without running to Mommy for support and validation. "Did he?" I said, keeping my voice carefully neutral. He's staying here until you two work things out, Carol continued, as if this was a minor marital spat that could be resolved with better communication. But frankly, I'm very disappointed in how you've handled this situation. The audacity was stunning. Her son had just confessed to having an emotional affair with his sister-in-law, and somehow I was the one who had handled things poorly. How exactly should I have handled discovering that my husband is in love with another woman, I asked. Carol's sharp intake of breath suggested I wasn't supposed to state the situation quite so bluntly. Marriage is about compromise, Emma. It's about working through difficulties together, not giving ultimatums when things get challenging. Challenging, I repeated. Is that what we're calling adultery now? No one has committed adultery, Carol said quickly. Marcus and Ashley have developed a close friendship, nothing more. You're being dramatic. The gaslighting was so blatant it would have been funny if it weren't destroying my life. Carol, Marcus confessed last night that he loves Ashley, and she loves him back. They've been planning to leave their spouses. How exactly is that just friendship? Marriages go through rough patches, Carol said, her voice taking on the tone she might use with a particularly slow child. The mature response is to fight for your relationship, not throw it away at the first sign of trouble. The first sign of trouble? My voice was rising despite my efforts to stay calm. I've been fighting for this relationship for 4 years while your family treated me like an unwelcome guest. I've tried to fit in, tried to earn your acceptance, tried to be the daughter-in-law you wanted, and now that Marcus has betrayed our marriage, somehow that's my fault too? You never tried to understand our family, Carol said, her mask of maternal concern slipping to reveal the steel underneath. You came into our lives with your own agenda, expecting us to change for you instead of making an effort to appreciate our traditions and values. Your traditions and values, I said slowly, apparently include covering up emotional affairs and blaming the wife when her marriage falls apart. That's enough, Carol snapped. I won't have you speaking about this family that way. We've been nothing but welcoming to you, and this is how you repay our kindness. The conversation deteriorated from there, with Carol alternating between accusations that I'd driven Marcus away and suggestions that I could win him back if I just tried harder to be the wife his family wanted. By the time I hung up, my hands were shaking with rage and disbelief. The second call came an hour later from Robert, who took a different approach but arrived at the same conclusion. Emma, I'm calling as someone who cares about you, he began, his voice warm with the kind of false sympathy that made my skin crawl. I think you're making a mistake by pushing Marcus away when what he needs right now is understanding and support. Support for what, I asked. For cheating on me with his brother's wife? Now, that's not fair, Robert said firmly. Marcus hasn't cheated on anyone. He's going through a difficult time, questioning his choices, and instead of being the supportive wife he needs, you're creating drama and ultimatums. The revisionist history was remarkable. In Robert's version, Marcus was the victim of an existential crisis rather than a man who had pursued his sister-in-law while lying to his wife. I was the unreasonable harpy who couldn't support her husband through his time of need. What about Ashley? I asked. Is she also going through a difficult time that excuses her behavior? Robert's pause was telling. Ashley is a mother of 3 young children. She's under tremendous stress, and sometimes people in that situation make poor choices. The important thing is that both Marcus and Ashley recognize their mistake and recommit to their marriages. Their mistake, I said flatly. That's what we're calling a months-long emotional affair that they've been planning to turn into physical abandonment of their spouses. You're being melodramatic, Robert said, his patience clearly wearing thin. If you could just step back from your own hurt feelings and think about what's best for the family as a whole, you'd see that this situation can be resolved. What's best for the family? I repeated. And what exactly would that look like? Forgiveness, Robert said simply. Maturity. Understanding that marriage is bigger than individual happiness or temporary attractions. Ashley and Marcus made an error in judgment, but they're both fundamentally good people who can move past this if their spouses are willing to work with them. The framework was breathtaking in its one-sidedness. Ashley and Marcus were good people who had made an error in judgment, while Kevin and I were the petty, unforgiving spouses who needed to work harder to save marriages that had been betrayed. Our pain was irrelevant, our trust was expendable, and our dignity was negotiable in service of maintaining the family's preferred narrative. And if I'm not willing to work with them? I asked. Robert's voice turned cold. Then I suppose you'll need to live with the consequences of that choice. The threat was implicit but clear. If I didn't play along with their version of reality, I would be cut off from the family entirely, which, given how they'd treated me for 4 years, sounded more like a reward than a punishment. The calls continued throughout the day. Kevin reached out in the afternoon, his voice strained with exhaustion and confusion. Ashley told me about her conversation with Marcus, he said without preamble. She says they were just talking about family pressures and marriage difficulties, nothing inappropriate. Do you believe her? I asked. Kevin's silence stretched long enough to answer the question. I want to, he said finally, but the explanation doesn't match what I've been seeing with my own eyes. What are you going to do? I don't know, Kevin admitted. Ashley's pregnant. The words hit like a physical blow. What? She told me this morning. She's about 6 weeks along. I did the math quickly in my head. 6 weeks meant Ashley had gotten pregnant right around the time Marcus and her emotional affair had been intensifying. The timing could be coincidental, but given everything else that had been happening, I had my doubts. Kevin, I said carefully, have you and Ashley been intimate recently? Not really, Kevin said, his voice barely above a whisper. She's been tired, stressed with the kids. We haven't been close in months. The implication hung in the air between us. If Ashley was pregnant and she and Kevin hadn't been intimate, then there were only a few possible explanations, none of them good for Kevin's marriage, or my remaining illusions about Marcus and Ashley's relationship. You need to get a paternity test, I said gently. I can't, Kevin said, his voice breaking. If I'm wrong, if the baby is mine, and I accused her of cheating, she'd never forgive me. And if I'm right, if you're right, then you need to know the truth. The truth might destroy everything, Kevin said. My marriage, my relationship with my kids, my place in this family. Your marriage is already destroyed, I pointed out. The question is whether you're going to acknowledge reality or live in denial, while everyone else benefits from your willingness to be deceived. Kevin hung up without responding, but I knew he was thinking about what I'd said. We were both facing the same impossible choice: accept the truth and lose everything we'd built our lives around, or pretend ignorance and let Marcus and Ashley have their affair while we played the role of convenient spouses. The evening brought the call I'd been dreading most. Ashley herself, her voice sweet and concerned in a way that made my teeth ache. Emma, I'm so sorry to hear about the difficulties you and Marcus are having, she began, as if she hadn't been the primary cause of those difficulties. I wanted to reach out and see if there's anything I can do to help. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. Ashley was calling to offer comfort for the marriage she'd helped destroy, positioning herself as the caring sister-in-law who wanted to support me through this challenging time. That's very thoughtful, I said, my voice saccharine with false gratitude. But I think you've done enough already. I'm not sure what you mean, Ashley said, though her tone suggested she knew exactly what I meant. I mean that offering to help fix a marriage you've spent months undermining is a bit rich, even for you. Ashley's pause was brief, but I caught it. Emma, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. Marcus and I are family, nothing more. If he shared some personal struggles with me, it's only because he needed someone to talk to. Someone to fall in love with, you mean? That's not what happened, Ashley said firmly. Marcus is going through a difficult time in your marriage, and sometimes people in that situation develop confused feelings. But it's nothing that can't be worked through if everyone involved is willing to be mature about it. The gaslighting was so smooth it was almost artistic. In Ashley's version, Marcus had developed confused feelings because of problems in our marriage, not because she had encouraged and reciprocated his attention. She was the innocent bystander who had somehow become the object of misplaced affection, not the woman who had actively pursued her brother-in-law while pregnant with someone else's child. And I suppose your feelings for Marcus are also just confusion? I asked. I don't have feelings for Marcus beyond normal family affection, Ashley said, But something in her voice suggested even she didn't believe that lie. If he's misinterpreted my sisterly concern, that's something he needs to work through in his own marriage. With your help, apparently. With professional help, Ashley corrected smoothly. I've already suggested that both of you consider marriage counseling. There are excellent therapists who specialize in helping couples work through these kinds of challenges. The suggestion that I should seek therapy to fix a marriage Ashley had helped break was so outrageous it left me momentarily speechless. She was literally recommending that I pay a professional to help me compete with her for my own husband's affection. How generous of you, I managed finally. I just want what's best for everyone, Ashley said, her voice dripping with false sincerity. Kevin and I have been so happy together, and I hate to see other couples struggling when there are resources available to help. The reference to her happiness with Kevin while she was carrying another man's child was the final straw. Ashley, I said, my voice deadly calm. Let me be very clear about something. I know what you and Marcus have been doing. I know about the emotional affair, the plans you've been making, and the lies you've been telling your respective spouses. And I know about the pregnancy. Ashley's sharp intake of breath confirmed that I'd hit my target. I don't know what Marcus has told you, she said, her voice losing some of its sugary warmth. But you're misunderstanding the situation. Am I? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been having an affair with your brother-in-law while lying to your husband and manipulating your in-laws into believing you're the innocent victim of unwanted attention. That's a terrible thing to say, Ashley said, but her protest lacked conviction. It's a terrible thing to do, I countered. But I suppose someone who can betray her husband and her marriage vows wouldn't have much trouble lying about it afterward. I think this conversation has gotten out of hand, Ashley said, her mask of concern finally slipping to reveal something harder underneath. You're obviously very upset, and you're saying things you don't mean. I'm saying exactly what I mean, I replied, and what I mean is that your little game is over. Kevin suspects the truth, I know the truth, and eventually everyone else will know the truth too. No one will believe you, Ashley said, and for the first time in our conversation, she sounded genuinely confident. I've been part of this family for years. I have 3 children with Kevin, a 4th on the way, and a reputation that speaks for itself. If you start spreading malicious rumors about me, everyone will see it for what it is. A bitter woman trying to destroy others because her own marriage failed. The calculation was chilling in its accuracy. Ashley had spent years building social capital with the Thompson family and their wider circle. She was the beloved daughter-in-law, the devoted mother, the woman who embodied everything they valued. I was the outsider who had never quite fit in, who had caused drama at family gatherings, who had failed to produce children or properly appreciate their traditions. In any conflict between us, Ashley would be believed and I would be dismissed. The affair would be reframed as my paranoid delusion, the pregnancy would be accepted as Kevin's without question, and I would be painted as the unhinged ex-wife who couldn't accept responsibility for her failed marriage. You're probably right, I said quietly, but that doesn't make it less true. Truth is subjective, Ashley said, her voice returning to its earlier sweetness now that she'd established her superior position. And the truth that matters is that I'm a devoted wife and mother who has never done anything inappropriate with Marcus or anyone else. If you choose to believe otherwise, that's your prerogative, but it won't change reality. After Ashley hung up, I sat in my empty apartment trying to process the sheer scope of what I was facing. Not only had my marriage been destroyed by people I'd trusted, but I was being systematically gaslit by everyone involved. Marcus was the confused husband going through a difficult time, Ashley was the innocent sister-in-law who had done nothing wrong, and I was the unstable wife who was making wild accusations because I couldn't handle my marriage's natural problems. The narrative was airtight, and my position was completely untenable. If I fought back, I would be dismissed as crazy. If I stayed quiet, I would be complicit in my own destruction. Either way, Marcus and Ashley got what they wanted, while Kevin and I paid the price for their choices. But the calls weren't finished. The next morning brought the final blow. Delivered by Carol with the kind of crisp efficiency she might use to cancel a disappointing catering service. Emma, after much discussion, Robert and I have decided that it would be best if you didn't attend any family gatherings for the foreseeable future, she said without preamble. The statement was so blatantly unfair that it took me a moment to process it fully. You're banning me from family events? We're protecting the family from unnecessary drama, Carol corrected smoothly. Your accusations against Ashley and your refusal to work on your marriage with Marcus have created an uncomfortable situation for everyone involved. My accusations, I repeated slowly. You mean my objections to my husband having an emotional affair with his brother's wife? Your paranoid delusions about a relationship that exists only in your imagination, Carol said firmly. Ashley is devastated by your allegations, and frankly, we can't subject her to that kind of hostility while she's pregnant and vulnerable. The victim blaming was so comprehensive it was almost impressive. Ashley was the vulnerable pregnant woman being attacked by the bitter ex-wife, rather than the woman who had helped destroy 2 marriages while carrying another man's child. I was the source of hostility and drama, rather than the person whose life had been systematically dismantled by people she'd trusted. So I'm banned from Thanksgiving, I said. You're banned from all family gatherings until you can demonstrate that you're willing to behave appropriately, Carol clarified. We simply can't expose the children to this kind of toxic environment. The children, Ashley's children, who would now be protected from the toxic influence of the woman whose marriage their mother had helped destroy. The irony was so thick I could taste it. What about Christmas? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Christmas is about family, Emma. About love and forgiveness and coming together in peace. If you can't commit to those values, then you don't belong at our celebration. The finality in Carol's voice made it clear that this wasn't a temporary punishment or a negotiating position. I was being permanently exiled from the Thompson family, banned from holidays and gatherings, and the social circle that had never really accepted me anyway. I see, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. And Marcus is fine with this decision? Marcus is focused on healing and moving forward, Carol said. He doesn't need the additional stress of managing your emotional reactions to situations you've misunderstood. Of course he doesn't. Emma, Carol's voice softened slightly, taking on the tone of someone delivering difficult but necessary medicine. I know this is hard to hear, but sometimes the kindest thing we can do for someone is help them see reality clearly. Your marriage to Marcus was never a good fit. You came from different backgrounds, had different values, wanted different things. Instead of accepting that incompatibility and moving on gracefully, you've spent years trying to force something that was never meant to be. The revisionist history was breathtaking. According to Carol, I hadn't been rejected by their family. I had simply been incompatible with their superior values and traditions. My marriage hadn't been destroyed by Marcus's affair. It had been doomed from the beginning by my failure to understand my place. And Ashley? I asked. I suppose she and Marcus are perfectly compatible? Ashley understands family loyalty, Carol said simply. She knows how to put the needs of others ahead of her own desires. Those are qualities that matter in a successful marriage. The qualities that mattered, apparently, included the ability to have an affair while maintaining plausible deniability and the social skills to convince everyone that you were the victim rather than the perpetrator. Ashley's talent for manipulation was being reframed as family loyalty, her betrayal of Kevin was being ignored entirely, and her destruction of my marriage was being presented as a natural consequence of my own inadequacy. I understand, I said, though understanding and accepting were 2 very different things. I hope you do, Carol said, and I hope that someday you'll be able to look back on this time and see that we were trying to help you, even when it felt like we weren't. After Carol hung up, I sat in the silence of my apartment and felt something fundamental shift inside me. For 4 years, I had tried to earn the acceptance of people who had never intended to accept me. I had compromised my own values, suppressed my own needs, and tolerated treatment that no one should have to endure, all in service of a family that had just banned me from their gatherings for the crime of objecting to my husband's affair. The unfairness of it was staggering, but it was also clarifying. I had spent so much energy trying to fit into their world that I had forgotten who I was outside of their expectations. I had been so focused on winning their approval that I had lost sight of my own worth and dignity. But now, sitting alone in an apartment that no longer felt like home, banned from holidays with people who had never wanted me there anyway, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: freedom. I was done trying to win over people who were determined to find me wanting. I was done playing by rules that had been designed to ensure my failure. I was done being the convenient scapegoat for other people's bad choices and moral failures. If the Thompson family wanted to rewrite history to make Marcus and Ashley the heroes of this story, they were welcome to try. But they were about to learn that I wasn't going to disappear quietly into whatever narrative they had constructed. I wasn't going to slink away in shame while they celebrated their perfect holiday gathering without the inconvenient wife who had dared to object to being betrayed. I had been dismissed, discarded, and banned from their precious family traditions. But I wasn't powerless, and I wasn't without resources. If they thought they could humiliate me into silence, they were about to discover exactly how wrong they were. The plan began forming in my mind slowly, like a photograph developing in a dark room. Romano's Italian Villa, the restaurant that served as the backdrop for all their most important celebrations. The place where they went to feel special and sophisticated and superior to people like me. The Thompson family's relationship with that restaurant was one of their most cherished badges of social status, a symbol of their refinement and their position in the community's social hierarchy. What would happen, I wondered, if that symbol was suddenly turned against them? What if their precious restaurant became the stage for a very different kind of performance, one where I controlled the narrative instead of being written out of it? I picked up my phone and began researching, my fingers moving across the screen with the kind of focused energy that comes from finally having a purpose. Romano's Italian Villa had a reputation that extended far beyond Naperville, attracting food critics and culinary enthusiasts from across the Chicago area. Chef Isabella Romano herself was something of a local celebrity, known not just for her exceptional cuisine but for her willingness to cater private events for clients who appreciated true artistry. The more I learned about Chef Romano and her restaurant, the more the outlines of my plan became clear. The Thompson family might have banned me from their Thanksgiving celebration, but they couldn't ban me from hosting my own. And if that celebration happened to upstage theirs in ways they couldn't have imagined, well, that would just be an unfortunate coincidence. I spent the next several hours making phone calls and sending emails, my confidence growing with each successful connection. Chef Romano's personal assistant was intrigued by my proposal for a private Thanksgiving dinner, featuring the restaurant's signature dishes. The cost was significant, but I had savings from my marketing career and a credit line that could handle the expense. More importantly, I had a vision that was quickly becoming an obsession. By evening, the basic framework was in place. Chef Isabella Romano would cater a private Thanksgiving celebration at my apartment, transforming my modest space into a showcase of culinary excellence that would rival anything the Thompson family could produce. The guest list would be small but carefully chosen. Maya and her family, a few colleagues from work who had become genuine friends, and Kevin, if he was brave enough to accept the invitation. It wouldn't just be a meal. It would be a statement, a declaration that I refused to be erased from the story, that I had value and dignity regardless of what the Thompson family believed, and that their attempts to humiliate me had only motivated me to create something better than anything they could imagine. The Thompson family wanted to celebrate Thanksgiving without the inconvenient wife who didn't understand their traditions? Perfect. They could have their predictable family gathering with the same menu they'd been serving for decades, while I hosted an event that would remind everyone exactly what they'd thrown away. As I finalized the details of my plan, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Excitement. For the first time since my marriage had started falling apart, I was moving forward instead of just reacting to other people's choices. I was creating something positive out of the wreckage of my life, transforming my exile from their family into an opportunity to build something better. The Thompson family had made their choice. They had chosen Ashley over me, tradition over truth, comfort over justice. But they had made one crucial error in their calculations. They had underestimated exactly who they were dealing with. I wasn't the broken, submissive woman they expected me to be. I was Emma Martinez, the scholarship kid from Texas, who had fought her way into their world and built a successful career through determination and intelligence. I had spent 4 years playing by their rules and accepting their judgment, but those days were over. If they wanted a war, they would get one. But it would be fought on my terms, with weapons they didn't even know I possessed. The banned wife was about to remind them exactly what they'd lost, and exactly what they'd never deserved in the first place. The morning of Thanksgiving arrived with crystal-clear skies and endless possibilities. I stood in my kitchen at dawn, watching Chef Isabella Romano transform my apartment into culinary perfection. Her team moved with precision, creating an atmosphere of sophisticated elegance that would rival any high-end establishment. "Today isn't just about food," Isabella said, arranging her ingredients with artistic flair. "It's about showing the world exactly who you are when you're not dimming your light for other people's comfort." Maya arrived first, followed by my colleagues Tyler and Sarah, then Kevin, who looked lighter than I'd seen him in months. We gathered around a table set with restaurant-quality linens and flowers, sharing courses that were nothing short of magnificent. The conversation flowed naturally, filled with laughter and genuine connection. Kevin raised his glass during dessert. To Emma, for reminding us that family isn't about blood relations or social obligations. It's about people who choose to celebrate each other. 3 hours later, my phone exploded with notifications. Maya had posted photos of our feast, and the images were being shared across social media. Comments poured in from friends and acquaintances, all asking about the incredible spread and the elegant atmosphere. Then Carol called, her voice tight with fury. "You hired our restaurant's chef? That's our place, Emma. You had no right." "Chef Romano runs a business," I replied calmly. "I was a paying customer." "This is vindictive and petty," Carol snapped, "flaunting your dinner party while we were having our traditional family celebration." "I hosted friends who wanted my company," I said. "If that somehow diminishes your gathering, perhaps you should examine why." Carol's tone shifted to false concern. "Your behavior is becoming erratic. We're worried about your mental state." "My mental state is excellent," I replied. "I've never been clearer about what truly matters." After she hung up, I felt profound peace. The contrast between my authentic celebration and years of Thompson family performances was startling. 3 weeks later, Kevin called with news that validated everything. The paternity test came back. "You were right about Ashley's baby." Marcus and Ashley's affair was finally exposed, but the family continued protecting their golden couple while Kevin filed for divorce. They rewrote the betrayal as a love story, exactly as I'd predicted. "Want to have dinner sometime?" Kevin asked. "As friends, I think we both deserve honest relationships." I smiled, looking around my apartment where I'd reclaimed my dignity. "I'd love that." The band wife had found something infinitely better than revenge. She'd found herself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.